Lecture 4, Communication and Motivation. Conflict between people is a fact of life, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Conflict leads to change. Most times, a relationship with frequent conflict may be healthier than one devoid of conflict. It means the relationship is alive and growing. We're not talking about destructive conflict with winners and losers here, though. And remember, too, managing organizational behavior is an effort to move an organization forward, to manage change and net progress for the organization. It's what leaders and managers are paid to accomplish. The tension of conflict can generate important new options that any single person would not have had the opportunity to discover. Communication is a response to tension between the randomness of team members' values and views regarding a present situation or goal, and a response to the need for a shared meaning that leads to organizational progress. Bottom line here is the vast majority of associates in your company want to do a good job. Communication is a way you enable and encourage this. So when we don't understand one another, we need to communicate. Only communication can produce action. The quality of communication is key in determining the quality of subsequent actions. Remember, organizational change is not static, but is dynamic in nature. This means that managing dynamic organizational behavior requires continuous attention. When communication is effective and relationships within our organization are well defined, then our group actions in a dynamic environment become consistent over time. The result of this is organizational trust that generates a willingness to do whatever is necessary to make things work, a calmness when unexpected things happen, and a strong understanding of what is expected and how it, whatever it is, will be accomplished. We must not begin with the concept of action, but with the concept of communication. Avoiding conflict is impossible, and managing it a task that all too often leads to frustration and fatigue. Furthermore, when conflict is overly managed, good ideas that are generated by conflict end up nipped in the bud, and in turn, opportunities for transformation are lost. So we begin to see that effective communication is critical in managing organizational behavior, inclusive of conflict and change. So let's go back, way back, like to the back of chapter 5. What? You thought I meant back to 400 or 300 BCE? Well, yeah, I meant that too. You see, as I read the chapter, it dawned on me that 80% of the chapter was about outgoing messaging, how to communicate outbound. The book started right up front with driving actions through persuasion. But didn't we just uncover that we need to start with the concept of communication and not action? It is only the last few pages of the chapter wherein our authors touch on communication intake, which by my way of thinking is the true first step. This seems, somehow backward to me. And really, I'm not the only one who believes this. Stephen Covey writes that the fifth habit of highly effective people is to seek first to understand and then be understood. Our book structured the chapter in the exact opposite way. Look, if it was possible to read the chapter backward, man, I'd recommend it. But that's really not possible. So, I will turn this lecture completely around as compared with the order of the chapter, in chapter 5 in our book. Please read the chapter as you normally would, but do keep this in mind during the course of the lecture. First, let's seek to understand. Socrates had a lot to say about seeking to understand. Today, we call this the Socratic method. Once we get the Socratic method down, we will then visit Aristotle and his concepts of being understood. Finally, we will convert all this communication intake and structure into a unity of purpose. It's called command intent. Here we will take a page or two from the U.S. Army Field Manual, FM 622. Our authors touch on it on page 166, so I'm not coming out of left field on this thing here. But I will bring a bit more to the table. The book talks about active listening, and I like how the book describes the three basic types of active listening, namely empathizing, analyzing, and synthesizing. This is all found in Table 5.5. However, I don't like these as types, but rather three aspects of good listening. In fact, we will see how Socrates uses open-ended and closed-ended questions to really understand the situation. Any situation. Remember, seek first to understand. Okay, so Socrates proposes 5 characteristics that form his method. We can see that these align well with the aspects we spoke about earlier. What I hope to show is that by learning and practicing these 5 characteristics, you will have a potent toolkit that enables you to seek first to understand. Remember, when we lack common understanding, we fail to communicate, and this in turn will lead to meager actions and ultimately failure of execution. The root of organizations that habitually fail to execute lies in poor communication and equally poor organizational behavior management. This makes sense, no? I mean, if we aren't all pulling on the same rope, then we lose. Skeptical and conversational are the first 2 points. When we speak of skeptical, most folks think of the negative and judgmental side of skeptical. Socrates speaks of skeptical reflexively, as in he, and you and I, must adopt a true and profoundly professed ignorance of the truth of the topic being discussed. Remember, too, my truth, your truth, other folks' truth, they might not be the truth, but merely our opinions. Essentially, Socrates tells us to toss our opinions in our pocket and not take them out during the discussion. This can be very difficult to do, especially when we are experiencing high stress and/or time pressure. Obviously, there are instances when there is simply no time for such a process. But remember, as you walk away from this method, you begin to walk away from a full understanding and begin to slip and slide towards the reptile brain and all the biases that entails. The best bet here is to make time, profess ignorance, and by this I mean, okay team, I'm going to put my opinion in my pocket and I'd like to hear what you all have to think. I know this sounds like I just opened up the floodgate for a free-for-all, but there will be structure. The second point here is to structure this as a conversation, not a bunch of monologues. Team members do not get to, in turn, like a series of turds being tossed on the table, foist all of this in your face for you to sort out. No, and this is important, do not let this happen. If it goes this way, you lose. No, this will be a series of questions that are posed by you. These questions are at times open and other times closed in nature. And I'll cover this in a bit. The analysis component is driven by searching for the correct definition. What exactly do you mean? Really, actually, that is the question. Oftentimes you cannot ask such a blunt question, though. Folks will simply get defensive. If there are team members in the conversation that feel empathy for the person you just asked such a blunt question to, they will respond negatively too, either sticking up for the poor unfortunate victim, which will eventually lead to a full-scale mutiny, or they themselves will shut down to avoid being asked a similarly blunt and aggressive question. We'll cover how to phrase such questions in a bit, but the bottom line here is shared understanding, according to Socrates, is an agreed-upon definition. Finally, and yes, this does all have to be brought together, the method will test the implications and consequences of the now joint understanding. I know this sounds really kind of highbrow, but I believe that Socrates is simply asking us to, as a group, validate we understand each other. It's not that we necessarily agree with each other, but that we agree upon the definitions. And it is this agreement of the definition that allows us to take action. The action may be to mediate 2 opposing sides, or the action may be to take steps to solve a particular problem. Heck, the actions and responses are endless, but the goal of seeking first to understand can effectively be met through the use of the Socratic method. Okay, a few more notes here. First and foremost, this is a question-based approach led by you. You're using questions to understand someone or a group of someones. Now fight the urge to interject your own opinion. Instead of jamming in your thoughts, give the person or team a chance to respond. Yes or no questions implicitly carry with them your bias, so avoid such questions. Let folks tell their story by way of examples. In fact, it's completely fine to ask, can you give me an example of that? Now, open-ended and closed-ended questions. Open-ended questions require more than a 1 or 2 word answer. The best way to show this is by example, and so I got a bunch of exampple here for you in the coming slides. Closed-ended questions do require a very short answer. So one way of thinking about a closed-ended question is that you are asking for someone to essentially place their bet. Yes, I'm putting my money on 22 red. Or yes, the next coin flip will be heads. Or yes, I believe the test will reveal after 22 hours of failure XYZ, that sort of thing. What follows are 2 pages of Socratic type questions. This list is not exhaustive. You should feel free to mix and match as you see fit. Let's take a stab here in terms of process. Let's say you've been assigned the task of rolling out a new company policy. Your first step is to gather a cross-functional team to help you in this endeavor. Next, you want to consider what Socratic questions you might ask. For example, your series of questions could be, we've been asked to roll out a state-up policy on the plant floor, meaning we will transition our workstations from sitting to standing. When we think of a stand-up policy, what do you believe is meant by this? What do you think the main issues here are? Can you give me examples of this? If we implemented this policy, what might be the consequences? What are we assuming here? What would someone say who disagrees with this policy? How could we go about finding out if these counter opinions are factual concerns or just preference? So I could go on, more questions, but the main point here is that you as the leader manager are engaging and understanding the viewpoints of the team assigned to help you manage organizational behavior, and you're doing so through a series of questions. The change has to happen, and you could choose to just force it. You'll meet resistance, step on toes, and essentially use a scorched earth method, right? But if that happened, what else would also happen as a result? And why? And by the way, that was a Socratic question. So here are a few more Socratic question examples. Just hit the pause and give them a read through. Now on to Aristotle. The book does a very nice job of outlining this topic, and I really cannot add too much to the discussion. Except, well, yeah, you knew this was coming, right? Mix is key. When I speak of mix, I mean the mixture of the 3. The graphic here hopefully describes visually what I'm going to try and convey in words. Resist the urge to rely too heavily upon one or even 2 of these fundamental elements. Seek best to be somewhere in the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 area there. So how do you know? Well, that is way easier said than done. The Socratic method can help. With a focused team to frame the definitions, you will have gained insight and leveraged more heads than your own and probably generated a pretty good script. Of course, if you're up in front of a large crowd giving a speech, then way before you get up there, grab some folks, ask some questions, get some feedback. And as a professor, I try to do the same. It's super easy for me to rely way too much on logos and ethos and neglect pathos. In fact, one could say that all of my presentations to you fall within that criticism. Look, man, I'm not saying it's easy. Just you need to be cognizant of the pitfalls. All right, unity of purpose, action towards change. And the book talks about command intent on page 166, and it's a statement that establishes commonality. And recall, too, that managing organizational behavior is a method to move an organization forward to some new state, to manage change and net progress for the organization. It's what you and I, as leaders and managers, are paid to accomplish. Any plan is a framework from which to adapt, not a script to be followed to the letter. Command intent is the means by which the commander, or in our case, you as the leader manager, envisions a desired outcome. This method allows you to lay out effective ways of achieving a goal, communicating to your team your vision, your intent, and decisions focusing on the results you expect your team to achieve. It fosters goal accomplishment by clearly conveying your intent. You can concisely assign tasks and purposes to your team. And you're going to set up a minimum number of coordinating measures necessary so that your team can stay synchronized to you and the wider organization. It helps you allocate and reallocate resources, and finally directs preparation activities and establishes times or conditions for execution or success. The key concept here is this: the measure of a good plan is not whether execution transpires as planned, but whether the plan facilitates effective action in the face of unforeseen events. As a leader and manager, you need to recognize and accept uncertainty in any operation or environment. This falls into the stuff happens category, right? Your goal is to reduce the amount of certainty needed to act in the face of unforeseen events, which allows your team freedom to act on your behalf. Essentially, you're requiring your team to have initiative on their part. This means that your intent must be clear and concise, and it's what you want your team to accomplish. The commander's intent must be understandable 2 levels down and recognizable 2 levels up. It's called 2 down, 2 up. For a middle manager at, say, a $20 million company, your written intent would be understandable by maybe a plant floor supervisor or a team lead, and recognizable by a company director as supportive of company goals or policy. And really, there's no harm in checking with these folks to make sure. You want to provide team members the initiative to figure out the how. Now, they must be trained, they must be capable and flexible. Don't underestimate this. But your written statement includes who, what, when, where, and why, and not how. The best command intents focus resource allocation, they drive unity of effort, and provide an avenue for feedback. Write plans with the proper level of detail, not so detailed they stifle initiative, or so general that they provide insufficient direction. So here we see 2 actual real-life written command intent orders. And I'm not going to go through these things in detail, but here we do see who, what, where, why, and when, but no how. How is decided upon by the team. Now, as a leader, you want to empower your team to use your commander's intent to decide whether and how to exploit opportunities. What you want to avoid is having the team that is paralyzed and can only act once they have checked with you. I mean, if things are static and they check once, maybe that works, but things are rarely static. Situations change. And now the team must keep asking you before they act. I've seen managers who run their teams this way. It's like they must be king or something. Maybe it's an ego thing. I don't know. Bottom line is, it's not effective, and it is exactly not what the goal of this class in organizational behavior management is about. So often folks just tell you what they need from you. The thing is that avoiding such verbal orders is one step in improving your effectiveness in delegation and management of your team. Such written instructions can benefit you and your organization by reducing the time you need to explain something, reducing the frustration for both you and your team because everyone's clear and have a sense of duty and purpose, and all have ownership, especially if you follow the Socratic method as part of your dialogue with your team. In short, avoiding verbal orders will improve execution efficiency and outcomes. So here we have an example of an AVO that I was exposed to in my first job as a fresh out engineer at General Motors. It was called, not surprisingly, an AVO, Avoid Verbal Orders. In essence, we wrote instructions down to avoid inherent miscommunication stemming from, verbal instructions. It's essentially standard work for providing command intent in the business world. Now I have 5 recommendations for the use of the AVO. First, make yourself a template. So spend some time developing a template for your AVO that works for you and your organization. See, you'll use this template frequently and you'll see others adopt and adapt it. It should look professional and have all the placeholder fields you anticipate needing, including the who, what, where, why, and when, but leave the how out. That is for your talented and well-trained staff to figure out. Set the correct level of detail. So like I stated earlier, you want to provide team members the initiative to figure out the how. I've seen this stated that you should be as explicit as needed, but no more. And remember, make it understandable. 2 down, 2 up. This will take practice, and usually the process of writing the steps down will help you simplify the process in your own mind and thus make the task easier for others to perform as well. So make it visual. Now, when possible, use trade-off curves or graphics or photos or screenshots to convey information effectively. A picture here truly is worth 1,000 words. Connect to the cloud. Feel free to use hyperlinks to connect to forums or other complementary resources. You may want to get your team started on the right foot, and in doing so, it'll improve your team's efficiency by completing the task. And make yourself available. So lead by example and be there for your team. They'll have questions and they'll need their support, and when they do come to see you, don't sit there like a king passing down pearls of wisdom and decisions. Instead, be Socratic and work the issues with them. This is a solid way to motivate and keep people engaged. Our final slide, folks, and this is something that's taught to military officers, and it's the concept of command as theater. It's also known as because folks expect us to. You'll need to be diligent and remember that you are responsible for what comes out of your mouth. You'll be amazed at what you said during a weak moment and how fast and virulently it will spread through the work environment, especially on the factory floor. Be apolitical. And I know, man, this can be hard to turn off, especially during an election year. But espousing political opinions in the office or the plant floor is a bad habit. Yeah, Mitch the lead operator spouts off and baits the heck out of you. Don't take the bait. You can turn off a would-be superstar by making political commentary. Just keep it at home. Be the caretaker of your own storyline. Yes, manner of dress, your word choices, your overt appearance, they all speak volumes and communicate to others in ways that set their impressions about you and your story. And the last point, you must be seen doing as much as saying, being both seen and heard. Nothing communicates to others your intentions more than you doing what you say and being there for your folks when they need you. Lead by example. Blah, blah, blah only lasts for so long, and then you burn out those little hairs in the cochlea of your team's ears that correspond to the frequency of your voice. Yeah, whatever is what they end up saying, typically behind your back. Don't let that happen to you. Lead by example. Pick up that shovel and start digging with them. Eat your own dog food. Well, you've made it again, another one of my scintillating lectures. So here's our lecture for call to action. The vast majority of associates in your company want to do a good job. Communication is the way you enable and encourage this. When we don't understand one another, we need to communicate. Effective communication is critical in managing organizational behavior, inclusive of conflict and change. Seeking first to understand can be effectively met through the use of the Socratic method. Command intent is the means by which the leader-manager envisions a desired outcome. As a leader, you want to empower your team through the use of command intent to decide themselves the how. Avoid having a team that is paralyzed and can only act once they have checked with you. And finally, be the caretaker of your own storyline. Be seen doing as much as saying.